solid works of scholarship is that there will be examples of usage given. These follow down below on this particular screen. It may be slightly too small a type for you to read, but for example, the definition of Sanskrit includes a quotation. Yule gave a quotation from Wilson's works and his translation of the toy cart. Now what we're intending to do as our next step, since the toy cart, Wilson's edition is available as a computer available accessible text, is to make a hyperlink so that someone going into Hobson Jobson will be able to click on the toy cart and be transported to the precise location where Sanskrit is referenced in the toy cart. This may not be very interesting if you think about it just as English, but let's take the case of Sanskrit. We have Apte's dictionary, the 4-volume Apte Sanskrit English dictionary is available, and some of you will know that many of the texts, the base texts, the mulas, are available now in machine-readable form. So our goal there will be to allow a hyperlink or a click as one finds the entry within the Apte dictionary that will transport you to the Mahabharata or the Rig Veda or whatever the text is, take you directly to the precise place, and you'll be able to see the entire context for this quotation that Apte drew upon. We think that this will expand the possibilities for research. One other way in which these dictionaries are coming to be valuable and important tools, if we think about integrative scholarship, is that we have turned over our dictionaries to Google. Now, some of you know that Google has been experimenting for years with optical character recognition. They've done an excellent job for the field of English, for French, Italian, the languages that are based on Roman characters. Where they've not done quite so well yet is with the regional scripts, Devanagari, Malayalam Lipi, or, Devanagari, of course, for Marathi. By using the head words from our dictionaries, Google is going back and improving the quality of optical character recognition so that it's possible to come up with closer approximations than what has been possible in the past. It's an example of collaboration, our work with people who are doing work on the breaking edge, the cutting edge of computing, and helping to generate new bodies of resources by virtue of optical character recognition that can then be drawn back for scholars to use and to play with in conjunction with other texts. Next, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the topic of sonic and visual resources. Here, I think you'll remember from my introductory comments that I've been involved with a team of people looking at this project we're calling Interwoven on the Indian Ocean Sound and Visual Resources. It's a great team, and I feel privileged to be part of that. There's an ethnomusicologist who is with us, Philip Bowman, 2 art historians, Anna Seastrand and Neil Atkinson, and a colleague librarian, Laura Ring. All of us are thinking from very different perspectives about what it means to bring these resources together. Now, what kinds of resources are coming available? We have been collaborating with bodies around the world, and let me cite a few examples to bring resources into the public view. One example, and I raise this specifically because it deals in the field of Indology, is that I was able to listen myself to what I believe is the very first recording ever made of Sanskrit. This is held at the EMI archives just outside London. It was made by a pundit, recorded by a pundit, not named, unfortunately, recorded in India, and the text is just amazing to me. What would you imagine would be the first recording made by the Berliners for the Berliner recordings? Well, to my astonishment, it was humor. It was a humorous text. What was it particularly? It was the Vidushika portion of Abhignana Shakuntala. So here's a pundit reading out in Prakrit the humorous portion of Kalidasa. I think that says something important to me, and we want to explore this. What is the role of humor in the traditions of Sanskrit? But what is the role of humor in recordings more broadly? Here I can point to the prevalence in more recent recordings by HMV of comics in Telang, in Marathi, in all of the languages of the early 20th century. Humor is a vitally important part of understanding the society. But I now know that humor is vitally important for understanding Indology in an integrated fashion. Most recently, that is just less than 2 weeks ago, I learned while visiting the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, talking about topics of the audio world, that a few years ago, they were successful at the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan in enlisting a recording team to go to Kerala and to make a recording by the last particular person who was a Vaidika, a Vedanta, a Vedic scholar in the field of Samaveda. He was a Samavedan who was the last living practitioner of his Shaka. So we now have a recording. He's gone, he is no more. But fortunately, we now have a recording of the entirety of the Samaveda from this particular Shaka. An amazing resource. Well, to give you an idea of some other things that we've been working on here, if you'll excuse me just for a moment, I'm going to have to divert. The name of Gauhar Jaan, one of the most famous Bais, a recording artist from the early part of the 20th century. She was one of the earliest people ever recorded by HMV. So we've been experimenting with what it would mean to bring together Gauhar Jaan with the text. I apologize. What you're supposed to be seeing and not seeing right now is that below the arrow that initiates the sound, the text is scrolling in Devanagari. And it's possible, if one elects, to change the script. You can see preserved. An amazing recording artist whose works include many famous recordings, and whose popularity was spread by virtue of postcards being circulated by HMV, a way of publicizing Gauhar Jaan as a famous artist and drawing further attention to her work, bringing together the visual and the sonic and the textual all together. As another example, and this closer to the field of Indology, I wanted to let you know that with support from the U.S. government, we were able to take George Grierson's Linguistic Survey of India and to take the 242 gramophone records he had created as part of the Linguistic Survey, have them converted and made available online. It's a phenomenal piece of recording work that was done. At the end, it was done very selfishly, you could say. There were only 5 of these recordings ever produced for each of the cuts. None of them were ever left in India. All of them were sent to the UK. So the only copies that are available now are at the British Museum, British Library, Oxford, Cambridge, and at Edinburgh. Digitized not only the audio, it's available online, but further, Grierson very generously was able to include the text, the transcription. There are only 4 recordings that were made of Sanskrit, But I thought this was interesting and it might be intriguing to you as people associated both with the Asiatic Society of Mumbai, but also people who live in this part of India. One of the recordings, it was made by someone named Pandit Lakshman Shastri Telang. Could he be connected with our very own Justice Telang? Who knows? But this recording was made in 1920s. It was recorded in what's called the recording was made in Benares, but it was a recording that was done in the style that's referred to as Maharashtrian recitation.
Textbook and script poetry, Maharashtra pronunciation by Pandit Lakshman Shastri Telang, May 1920. Adi Raja Namo Devato Upano
Somewhat reluctantly, I'll bring Sanskrit in this area. You'll recognize the recitation style. I think it's still part of the style that's used in Maharashtra. There's a beauty to it. It resonates with me because the Navapakhyana is the first text that I and almost all students studying in the United States learn when we begin Sanskrit using Lamben's reader. So to see this and to hear it and to have it available for people to access, I think is valuable and will be valuable for generations to come. Let me revert back then to the PowerPoint presentation. Continuing on with sonic and visual resources, I'd like to show you that we have produced quite a large collection of postcards. You may think, postcards, what value could they possibly have for Indology? And yet, it was interesting to look beyond just the beautiful, the Eastern Indian Railway postcard. Now known, some of you will probably recognize as Dhumnaga, travels with steam in Sanskrit. But additionally, I think you'll be happy to see that there are views not only of your fair city, Mumbai, this from the Rajbhat Tower. There are views of Town Hall, the Asiatic Society now, and in its earlier days. But more pertinent, I wanted to show you that there are very interesting, I believe, postcards that represent a snapshot of what was going on at a time. Here we have a postcard, interestingly, printed in France. It has a French legend as well as an English legend. It shows what are described as young Maratha Brahmins. And I picked this up for a variety of reasons. It's interesting historically. Here we have something that I think we can date to about 1910 as a postcard. It tells us something important about the setting. One can see clothing style. It's possible to take a look and think about the treatment of hair, posture, the very fact that these were young fellows who were studying, brahmacharis probably, early days. My guess, but maybe one of you could confirm this, is that it may be possible to go beyond just saying that these were Maratha Brahmins, and you could say that they were Deshasta, or that they were from the Konkan. I don't know. But I suspect there are clues that are part of this visual representation that eventually one would like to think of as being connected back into the world of sonic representations of the sort we heard with Pandit Telang from the 1920 recording, and in other ways with Samvegans and other resources that are textual and audio. I'm not going to say too much about maps and GIS. I'm running longer than I thought I would. But maps are extremely important. Here you have a simple representation of the language families. I won't go on to describe in more detail than simply to say we have begun and nearly completed a full set of maps at the 1 inch to a mile level. These are scanned, they're geo-referenced. And to remind you, if you've not seen the topographic sheets from the Survey of India, these 1 inch to the mile sheets are so detailed that you can actually see the outlines of houses. What does that mean in the context of Indology? Well, if we associate that with the previous postcard that we were looking at, it may mean that in the foreseeable future, one can use GIS, Geographic Information System approaches, with old historical maps to actually locate where potshallas were and to begin giving a physical space and location to individual students and their teachers, or the places where major productions of Indological texts were taking place. So once again, another body of resources that can be brought together through the digital humanities in creative ways to allow for newer understandings, fuller understandings, richer understandings, and new knowledge to be generated for the field of Indology. What does this mean in practical terms? And here I'll try to bring the understanding of Indology to a conclusion. In our meeting yesterday, I had the opportunity to talk and share an anecdote, one of my favorite anecdotes, about a discovery no one could have predicted in the field of the humanities based on computing being brought to texts. Here specifically I refer to Diderot's famous encyclopedia that was produced in French. And the discovery made within the last couple of years by a colleague of mine at the University of Chicago, analyzing the text of Diderot's encyclopedia, comparing it with the work of earlier Jesuit authors, French Jesuits, he found that a large percentage of what appears in Diderot's encyclopedia was plagiarized from the earlier Jesuit authors. Not something that one could easily assess by just sitting down and pouring through all the texts. You would have to have a fantastic memory to be able to identify those points of connection. Now, what does this mean for us in the field of Indology? I would suggest that in a comparable way, when we have large bodies of sound, large bodies of text, visual resources, we may discover that there are linkages beyond the known linkages already attested in the literature